Will the New Orleans Saints actually consider trading Chris Olave? We're going to talk about that on the Straight Up Saints podcast. And Kellen Moore gives an update on the quarterback room, what to expect for that position for the Saints. Let's get right to it right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Olave, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott Vicknair Injury Lawyers. You've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, hurt offshore, Scott Vicknair handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. We've reached that point where kind of have the owners' meetings going on. Not a ton of roster-related news going on for the Saints, and yet as we get closer to the draft and we try to figure out where the heck the Saints are going to go with pick number 9, there's been some odd rumors involving Olave, and I think, for me, it's so complicated because I understand there's that one side of, all right, he's been injured, where do you go with him? But I just don't see a move being made this year. And frankly, I don't think the Saints should even consider making a move this year, assuming you don't get a first-round pick offered in return. And I don't think you will right now, given the current situation. So let's break everything down and let's talk about Chris Olave and why I believe he will be with the Saints this year and why I think that's the right move for the team to keep it going forward with number 12. It came out yesterday that the Bills are looking to explore a trade for either Jordan Addison of the Vikings or Chris Olave of the Saints. This came from Matt Perino of Syracuse.com. He's been a Bills beat reporter for a long time, really well respected within the industry. So I don't think this is one of those reports you just make up. I don't think this is a rumor that is just out there for shits and giggles. I believe the Bills are trying to add a wide receiver, but are they going to be able to land Chris Olave? That's the report. Here's my take on all this, all right? A, I think the Saints at this point in time would like to see what Chris Olave could do in Kellen Moore's offense. B, I think Kellen Moore would like to see what Chris Olave can do in his offense. And he actually said this week, again, with all the meetings going on in the NFL, he said Chris Olave has had a huge impact on this team. He's going to have a huge impact this season. So he wants him in his offense. I think it makes sense for the Saints to want to see what Chris Olave can do in another offense. But let's just talk about the logistics of this and why I don't think it makes any sense to even consider a trade right now. Chris Olave's finished 3 seasons. His first 2 seasons when fully healthy, he's had over 1,000 yards receiving, despite the fact that his quarterback room hasn't been great. His first year was Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton, and then his second year was Derek Carr, and a little bit of Jameis Winston sprinkled in. His third year obviously was going to be Derek Carr, but he caught passes from Carr, he caught passes from Jay Kaner, and he caught passes from Spencer Rattler. And for me, yes, Olave's numbers technically were down. He also missed a lot of time. Chris Olave missed, I believe it was 9 games last season due to injury. Had he played the full season, I believe he would have hit the 1,000-yard mark with ease because that's the type of receiver he's proven to be. And we'd be feeling a little bit more comfortable, not about the production, but about the player long-term health-wise. Because if you're asking any Saints fan, I think the only concern you legitimately have with Chris Olave is his health. Because he's proven, regardless of the quarterback situation, he's going to give you 1,000 yards receiving if he's fully healthy. That's just been who he is, regardless of the quarterback under center for the Saints. So that's a huge positive. Now, the concussions are a huge scare, and I can't sit here today, to be honest, and say, oh, that part's gone, because those are things out of Chris Olave's control. Chris Olave can make a nice catch over the middle of the field, and he can't really control how high the ball's thrown, if the safety over the top is going to crush him up high. Those are things out of his control, so it's tough to pin that on the player. I get that concern, and I would argue right now, because of that concern, even if you wanted to move Olave, which I don't believe the Saints will, nor should they, I believe you're not going to get the best possible return for a player who's only been in 3 years and when he's healthy isn't a 1,000-yard type of guy. You probably get offered a day 2 pick. How high of a day 2 pick, I don't know. But that's where you get offered. So for me, if I'm the Saints, the minute I can't get a first-round pick in return, I'm hanging up the phone. Because truthfully, look, if the Bills called you today and said, hey, pick number 30 for Chris Olave, I don't know if I would do it, but it is a conversation because it's a first-round pick for a rebuilding team. Now, the counterpoint as to why I think for the Saints it's worth kind of taking the gamble and rolling the dice here with Olave, and whatever happens, happens. He's one of the few players that I can legitimately say on a given Sunday, I'm excited to watch him play football because I think he's a very good player. I believe he's one of the few building blocks the Saints have. And I think if they're going to fast track their situation offensively, it kind of starts with Chris Olave because I love Rashid Shaheed. I think he's a great speed threat. Obviously, I adore Alvin Kamara, what he's been for the Saints as a player and a leader for the last several years. But Olave, to me, is probably their best offensive player. He just hasn't stayed healthy. And I think for New Orleans, there's so much talk and so much smoke about them possibly adding a quarterback in this draft, whether it is trading up for Cam Ward, whether it's trading up for Shedeur Sanders, whether it's taking Jackson Dart, whatever it may be. If the Saints are going that route, if they really want a young quarterback to put in Kellen Moore's system, to get younger offensively, to start a new era at that position, you probably want your best wide receiver in the fold. That's just my thought. That's just my opinion. And when it comes to Chris Olave, Olave right now is 24 years old. So if you bring in a young quarterback who's got a receiver who's 24 right now, you'd imagine, hey, for the next 5-6 years, if he stays healthy, you might be able to build something special. Now, I know the ifs are there about health, but that's got to be the vision for the Saints. So yes, maybe there's concerns about bailing because of injuries, but the concerns about making the payment of how much are you going to have to extend Olave, what's it going to cost, I think for the Saints, you don't even have to cross that bridge this year. Remember, Brandon Ayuk, he played the 4 years with the Niners, was on the 5th-year option. Before that 5th-year option even gets played on, then he gets the extension. So Olave right now is only 3 years in. He could play this year. If he balls the hell out, I almost feel like, all right, it's not a bad problem to have. Now you feel a little bit more comfortable paying that player. And if it's more of the same, and then next year you're thinking, I don't know if I want to spend $30 million, $28 million on Olave, then fine, entertain trades if that's where you're at, if you don't plan on keeping the player. But I think with a new coach, with a potential new quarterback, we'll see about the new quarterback part if they end up drafting one, keeping Chris Olave, who is your best wide receiver, who is still just 24 years old, makes all the sense in the world for the Saints. And for those reasons, I believe you keep him this year because I also don't think the return would be great anyway. So you roll the dice with Olave, a hope on a bounce back, which if he's healthy, I'm very confident he will bounce back. And then you go from there if you're the Saints. So we'll see what happens with the Chris Olave front. But I believe right now, looking at this team, assuming you can't get a first-round pick, and I don't believe they will, yeah, you pick up the phone because that's how you conduct a proper business. You don't just hang up the phone. But I'm probably not exactly thrilled while I'm on the other line if I'm the Saints and I'm not getting offered something great in return. But I do find it fascinating that both teams that have been linked to him so far this offseason, Bills and Patriots, both AFC East teams in need of wide receiver help. I get it. But I think for the Saints, look, you would create a hole. You know, that the way I look at it is this. If I trade Chris Olave today, if I'm the Saints, pick number 9 might be a wide receiver. And guess what? I don't know if that guy is going to be able to play as well as Chris Olave, and Chris Olave is healthy. And this isn't to say Chris Olave is a top 10 wide receiver because he's not. He's not a top 10 guy. But he is a wide receiver who can get over 1,000 yards regardless of who's under center. That's pretty damn valuable. Whereas if I take a rookie, A, they got to learn the system. B, I don't know if they're any good. And I'm not going to compare the two players because one's significantly better than the other, in my opinion. But never forget, Titans traded A.J. Brown because they drafted Treylon Burks. And now Mike Vrabel didn't agree with that move, but the GM thought, hey, similar build, physical receiver. Here we go. Maybe he could be the next A.J. Brown. And Treylon Burks, for better or worse, has not been a good player, and that's me being kind. And A.J. Brown now, Super Bowl champion, great wide receiver still. Eagles aren't where they're at without A.J. Brown. So, you know, you're always careful about whether or not you replace guys and how tough it is. So the Saints shouldn't feel that pressure right now to remove Olave from the situation. Next year, depending on how this season goes, we can have that conversation. If he doesn't play great or if his price is too much, all right, you figure it out. But frankly, if his price is too high, that means he played really well. And then you just pay the dude. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But as current constructed for the Saints, I'm not making a move so far. So let's see what you guys have to say in the live chat, and then I'll get over to some interesting comments that Kellen Moore made today that were very anti-Dennis Allen. but in the best way possible. Half-Life saying, morning, Chris, what's going on, man? Jerry said, what happened at 9 a.m.? I had something to come up. I was supposed to have a 9 a.m. show, and I had to push it back. So my apologies on that, but wanted to be transparent with you guys on that front. Jerry saying, Olave's not getting traded. I don't believe he is, nor should he. Now, could crazier things happen? Maybe, but I don't believe he'll get traded. I really don't. DJ Trauma says, what are the Bills offering, though? I'm listening. Yeah, look, I think, to me, as I said at the beginning, if the Bills offer you pick number 30, which is a first-round pick, I think that's where your ears kind of perk up, because a Saints team that is rebuilding with a new coach, maybe having 2 first-round picks is exactly what you want. And you can kind of say, hey, pick 9, pick 30, pick 40. We hit on those 3 picks, we're back in business. Now, easier said than done, and the Saints' track record, frankly, has not been very good. But that is where you at least have my curiosity. If you call and you're offering pick 60-something, I'm not doing that. I'm not. It's just not, for me, Olave is more valuable to the Saints than them picking 60th. So that's just kind of where I'm at on this situation, but I agree with you. Calvin says, if they're trading up for a quarterback, absolutely not. If not, there's really no reason to trade him. I'm sorry. You said, if they're trading up for a quarterback, absolutely. If not, there's no reason to trade him. I do agree with that. Calvin. And that's kind of my thought process, right? If the Saints, let's say, came to an agreement that, hey, we need Cam Ward, and Cam Ward is the guy, and you have so much conviction, but it's going to cost you moving up. It's going to cost you picks. It can cost you Olave. I can stomach that because it's for the quarterback position. But if you draft a quarterback at 9 and then flip Olave for like a second-round pick, then that, to me, is odd roster construction. That's where it comes into play. So I agree wholeheartedly with you. Jerry says, why do these teams keep coming after Saints players? Any team, but why us? Truthfully, Jerry, I just think right now it comes back to what I said before. The Saints don't have a lot of building blocks. So the few guys that they have that are good, if you're a team that maybe it fits a position of need. So, for example, the Bills really need a wide receiver. Patriots need a wide receiver. You call the Saints and it's like, hey, you probably aren't winning games right now with Chris Olave anyway. Doesn't mean he's not a good player. It's just, it's very hard to win games if your best player is a wide receiver right now. So you call and you say, hey, what's it going to take? And I think that's what it comes down to. This has happened with other teams before. This is nothing new. I'm sure think about a bad team, but I'm sure the Raiders have gotten calls for Max Crosby prior to giving that extension. Myles Garrett with the Browns, like, they are not a team capable of winning right now. Obviously, Myles Garrett signs the lofty extension that they gave him, but had they not been willing to give him that extension and teams were calling, it's a similar situation, right? So that's the way I view it. Calvin says Saints rebuilding OG or should be so everybody's going to dangle carrots in front of the rabbit and see if they can get into the bite. Yeah. So to me, that's what it is. Jaden says, do not trade Olave. No way. No. Look, I don't think they will, Jaden. So I'm sorry if I give anyone a little late morning, early afternoon scare on this Tuesday. I don't believe they're going to trade him. But look, as we get closer to the draft, if these rumors keep popping up, it's something to monitor. I think for Buffalo, they're in an interesting spot because if I'm Buffalo, if not now, when? When is the Super Bowl appearance coming for the Josh Allen Buffalo Bills era? And I think they do need another wide receiver. I like Khalil Shakir. I really do think that Kincaid should be better. I thought he struggled last year. James Cook's obviously a very good running back. So they have pieces. I think they're missing one more. And I think a guy like Olave, if you put him on the Bills and you tell me he's healthy, I mean, that makes them really, really scary. I mean, they're already a scary team, but that takes them another level. So I think, look, you hear these rumors and you got to just pay attention to them just so you're not taken by surprise. Do I believe the Saints are going to trade Olave, though? My answer is no. DJ Trauma says they'll always try and come pick off our rosters because our jackass GM can't put the pieces together, but he knows how to get some of the pieces. Look at the Eagles, Bengals. People leave here and have championship success. Bond and CJ just won a championship. Yeah, look, the Bond one is one that's kind of frustrating, right? Would love for him to still be on the Saints, him being one of their building blocks on defense, which I believe the defense has gotten older, so to have a guy like Zach Bond be a building block would have been a luxury. No longer the case. As for CJ's interesting because he's clearly a solid football player, but he wears every welcome thin. There's a reason the Eagles move on from him. There's a reason the Lions moved on from him. There's a reason the Eagles moved on from him again. And look, he's in Houston now. I'm sure he'll have success. And I'm sure Houston will want to get rid of him in a little bit. So he's got such an interesting situation. Jerry says, that's why I'm a Mickey Loomis basher every day. Jaden says we need Chris Olave and Kellen Moore's offense in 2025. So you mentioned Kellen Moore. Let's talk about that real quick. So Kellen Moore today says, in almost every circumstance, the backup quarterback should be defined going into the season. Said he'll never say never about a competition going into the season, but with limited practice reps during the season, defining the backup's important. Why does that matter to me? Why should that matter to us Saints fans? Well, Dennis Allen decided he was going to have a quarterback 2 competition pretty much until the day that Derek Carr got hurt, and it said, oh, shit, now we actually have to figure out who's going to play quarterback. And that, to me, is just stupidity. And again, Dennis Allen's probably a good dude, definitely a great defensive coordinator, but that is stupidity. And for Kellen Moore to say that, good to hear. Not surprised that a former quarterback knows what he's doing at that position. What I will say, though, is if the Saints take a quarterback, this is going to make this offseason ridiculously interesting. So I don't know about you guys. The way I feel right now is January was exciting. February was somewhat exciting because you make the Kellen Moore hire. And we've hit this lull. And part of it is because the Saints don't really make a lot of free agency signings, right? Justin Reed, love that move. Bringing back Chase Young, not many people like it. I can understand the reasoning behind why they made that deal, and I hope Chase Young, the best is yet to come for him. I really do. And I do think the talent is there. But outside of those 2 moves, did the Saints really do anything exciting this offseason? Not really, right? Some minor signings here and there, and that's about it. And I think for them, if they were to add a quarterback, you're going to talk about April till probably the beginning of the season where there's another layer of intrigue. Now, again, it depends when you add the quarterback. I think if the Saints keep doing day 3 picks, at some point, the hold that you have on the fan base from just a curiosity standpoint will decline, right? Because you drafted Rattler. Rattler wasn't necessarily bad, but Rattler wasn't consistent. And Jake Haener doesn't look like an NFL quarterback right now. So when you keep taking late round flyers, I guess the attention span declines. But if the Saints take a quarterback at 9, which I will talk about at some point when we get closer to the draft, or if the Saints take a quarterback with pick 40, or take a best player available at 9 and then trade back into the first round from pick 40, things will be interesting. That gives you something to talk about. I think it probably spells trouble for Rattler and Haener. Definitely trouble for Haener regardless of what happens there. But B, it makes us start asking questions as to what is the mold for Kellen Moore's quarterback room, because he's worked with different quarterbacks, right? Dak, Herbert, Jalen Hurts. What is the mold for that? If he wants a Jalen Hurts type of quarterback, I think you're probably looking at a guy like Jackson Dart, who, again, not as athletic as Jalen Hurts, but similar type of builds. I believe that would be fascinating if that's where they go. If Shador's there at 9 and they take him, I think Shador is one of those quarterbacks where I don't see a ton of special traits, but I do believe he would start immediately in the NFL because I think his style is ready to play. And he's got a ton of snaps. That, to me, snaps is important. How many reps, how many live bullets have you faced? Shador's faced a lot. And Cam Ward, obviously, if you trade up to get him, you're clearly starting him. You're not trading up all those picks and then not playing the kid in the first year for him. So that would be the most interesting story. But I do appreciate Kellen Moore coming out today and obviously not giving you a hint as to who will join the quarterback depth chart if there will be any moves, but telling you straight up, we are not having a QB2 competition going into the season. Again, said never say never, but I don't see that happening. And it was one of the things that bothered me last year. It felt like there's indecisiveness when it came to roster construction, when it came to building out the depth chart, at least with Kellen Moore. We don't know if he's going to be a good coach. We don't know if his offense is going to work, but there isn't going to be flip-flopping back and forth as to who's going to be QB2. And frankly, the fact that that was one of the biggest stories for the Saints last year should have been the red flag for us, that warning sign that maybe the season's not going to go that well if you can't even figure out who's going to be your backup quarterback. Now, I know we all got bamboozled by those first 2 weeks of the season. Shit happens. But, man, it's a little refreshing to know that there's a little bit more of a stern decision maker as opposed to a guy who, again, really good coordinator, but just wasn't a head coach. So salute to Kellen Moore on that. Not a ton, again, outside of that for the Saints. This has been a relatively tame last few weeks for the team. But I think it's going to be interesting, of course, to see what happens, how this all breaks down for the Saints. Now, there were some rule changes. Both teams possessing the ball in overtime. I believe that one's getting passed. Touchback being moved to 35. How that affects the Saints, we'll see. We'll see. Rashid Shaheed, I believe, is a great returner, but I think the Saints would make more sense using Dante Pettis or maybe Willis Jones in that variety. Let Shaheed be your wide receiver 2 for a full season, see how that works. So we'll go from there. Another thing for Kellen Moore that I forgot to mention, but he was asked about Brandon Cooks, said he wanted to add a little bit of a different wide receiver to the room, but they just thought the value was too good to pass up with Brandon Cooks. And I hope that means we're getting Brandon Cooks from 2023 and not Brandon Cooks from 2024. If that's the case, adds a little bit more to the Saints depth chart there. Logan says, do you think if the Steelers don't sign Rodgers after the draft and the Saints get a quarterback in the draft, do you think Carr gets traded to the Steelers? Great question, Logan. I will say this. If, let's say, the Saints draft a quarterback in the first round and Rodgers doesn't sign with the Steelers, like you mentioned, I believe that is the best possible landing spot for Derek Carr, and I believe Derek Carr's people, his camp, if they were smart, that's where they want to go. Now, I believe Rodgers is going to sign with the Steelers, but it's a great question. I do think if the Saints draft a quarterback early, the Derek Carr trade rumors will pop up again. And I'm going to be honest, the Derek Carr trade rumors, again, put my opinion of him to the side. I believe when something comes up that many times, it no longer is just a coincidence. It no longer is just a fan rumor. I believe there is a little bit of disconnect. I think there is a little bit of sour grapes. I think there is a quarterback who said, oh, man, I would have loved to hit the open market, and I don't blame him, right? Jets were looking for a quarterback. Giants were looking for a quarterback. Seahawks were looking for a quarterback. Like, there were options, And I think for Carr, when that welcome's kind of been worn out, him and the Saints clearly don't vibe the way we all thought this may have worked when the signing first happened. Steelers would make a lot of sense. And look, call me delusional. I believe if the Saints were to draft a quarterback and then trade Derek Carr, I think they can get a third-round pick for him. And the only reason I say that is you oftentimes than not trade for a contract than you do a player. And because the Saints have shelled out most of the money already to Derek Carr, any team that would take on Derek Carr isn't paying an awful lot. So if you're the Vikings, let's say, and you watch J.J. McCarthy play and you're like, I don't really like what I'm seeing yet. I don't know if he's ready. And you say, all right, maybe I'll take on Derek Carr. Won't cost me a lot. You're probably giving up a third-round pick. You're in win-now mode anyway. So it's a great question. I think it'd be a nice landing spot for Derek Carr. But truthfully, where you sell me on that is just a thought of the Saints drafting quarterback. And I know this is considered a weak quarterback class, but I'm telling you, the NFL is very unpredictable. I remember in 2021, that quarterback class was supposed to be special. And Trevor Lawrence has been underwhelming. Zach Wilson has been resorted to a backup. Justin Fields is now getting his second shot as a starter, but for the last year and a half, uncertainty surrounding him. Trey Lance might not even be in the NFL next season. Mac Jones is a backup. So, I've seen good quarterback classes end up whiffing. Now, on the flip side, sometimes you just get a bad quarterback class and it's legitimately bad. Like I remember the Kyler Murray class with him, Daniel Jones, the late Dwayne Haskins, Drew Lock. Like that wasn't considered a good quarterback class. And yeah, Kyler's been the best of that bunch, but Kyler's been underwhelming at times. So, sometimes it does deliver where a bad class ends up being bad. And look, sometimes a good quarterback class ends up shining. It's just not the players that you would think. Like Josh Allen and Lamar from their draft class have exceeded guys who were drafted ahead of him in Baker and in Sam Darnold. Now, you got a Josh Rosen stinker in there, but quarterback's unpredictable. But the thought of the Saints taking one, to me, is exciting, especially if it's early on. It doesn't mean it's going to work, but, you're trying to usher in a new era. And if I'm Kellen Moore, if I really like a quarterback in this class, I'm doing this now so I have a longer runway with that player. Because if you don't take a quarterback this year and you take him next year, or maybe the prospect pool is better. Maybe it is. But you might not have as long of a leash because that rookie struggles year 2, and year 2 the team struggles, and year 1 your team wasn't that good. You're entering year 3 with a lot of pressure. Whereas if Kellen Moore takes his quarterback this year, you're kind of learning on the fly. You're both kind of taking the lumps together. Year 2 could be that developmental, show a lot of progress type season, where year 3 is where you try to take that next step and be a playoff team. So, maybe I'm looking at it falsely and I have the wrong idea, but if Kellen Moore likes Jackson Dart or Shedeur Sanders, I would say Cam Ward. I just don't know if the Saints are going to make that trade to move up. Then yeah, I would say go for it. I just don't know if they will. And I think it's going to be interesting. But everyone says wait for the next quarterback class, and that's been a big conversation. But we don't know how next quarterback class will be. We don't know for certain that Arch is going to declare. And truthfully, guys, I have this feeling that he waits one more year. Look, I love Nico from Tennessee. I think he's a talented quarterback, but let's see how he plays this year. Same thing with Drew Aller, right? Like everyone's like, oh, if Drew Aller left this year, he'd be a first-round pick. Yeah, sure. But let's see how he plays because, I'm not comparing quarterbacks because this doesn't mean Drew Aller plays like this guy. I think Drew Aller is a much better prospect, and his game fits today's era. I remember years ago, Matt Barkley from USC was being like touted as this next big thing, and he came back for one more year at USC, didn't play that well, and we were talking about a potential first rounder. I think he went like fifth round of the Buffalo Bills or something like that. So, quarterback classes are unpredictable. It's the toughest position to evaluate. And if the Saints end up having a really good evaluation on one of them, and Lord knows they've done their homework. I mean, they're even having dinners with guys like Quinn Ewers. So, the Saints are in those meetings extensively looking at this quarterback class. They're in the quarterback market. You see what happens. But obviously, regardless if you make the quarterback pick or not, whoever it ends up being, I think you got to make sure you end up keeping Olave because this really is a situation where I think the Saints have to look at more as a on-the-fly rebuild because they refuse to fully rebuild. So an on-the-fly rebuild, got some vets in the building. If you add a young quarterback, you're keeping Olave and Shaheed around, you might make something fun. And I think as a Saints fan, that's what I'm probably asking for this year. And I'm sure you guys are too. The last thing I want is to see last year's Saints team with a little bit of a paint job. Same team, but a little bit of a paint job, right? Car was red, now it's green. Still the same car. And if you go into the season with all those vets, not a ton of excitement, I don't know. Look, I'll be excited anyway just for having a new coach and seeing how Kellen Moore's offense translates with him at the helm, but it's going to be a little different. It's going to be a little different for sure. So we'll see what happens with New Orleans. At this point, guys, right now, I am just begging and hoping that the Saints can get to a point where we got something really, really juicy and exciting to talk about. But we'll see what happens. I think we've reached that lull in the offseason where you're just waiting for the draft, waiting for the selection to be made. And obviously, once that happens, we'll be fun. We'll have our live streams. We'll have our analysis on every pick that goes on. But that'll be something. Now, one more thing before I let you guys go. And this, I'll branch out into another video for another day to get really into this topic because it's very important. I saw a stat this morning that I think really, really shows where the Saints are at in the running back position. From 2024, teams with the fewest rushes of 20-plus yards from their running back, only two teams were worse than the Saints in that category, the Rams and the Chiefs. The Saints only had 3 rushes of 20-plus yards from the running back. This is not Alvin Kamara slander. This is not Alvin Kamara's washed allegations. Alvin Kamara is still a very good player. The Saints, though, desperately need to get another running back in that room and be able to take the pressure off, but also have a change of pace guy. And yesterday was kind of enjoying my day off, looking through some running backs, and I mentioned it on Twitter and I put it out there, and obviously we get into it more extensive as it goes on, but Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, DJ Giddens from Kansas State, and Jaden Blue from Texas are guys that are later on in the draft that I think might actually be nice picks for the Saints. Whether it's early day 3, late day 2, whatever it may be, those are playmakers I wouldn't mind seeing the Saints take a shot on because they need help at that position. And, it kind of goes hand in hand with the Olave thing. You keep Olave because you're trying to build an offense. You're trying to get back to a point where you feel really good about things. But you also have to add more talent to this offense. And I think getting another running back that you could fit in with Kellen Moore's offense, I think that make a lot of sense. JW says if Olave's back in 2025, he must stay on the field and show more progress than what he's shown so far. I'm just not impressed with what Olave's done as a starter. More production is needed. I do think more production is needed. I won't deny that. The one thing I would say about Olave the one thing I'll give him, everything the Saints have asked him to do, he has done. They need they asked him puts on muscle. They asked him to be a better run blocker this past season, and he was. And, there is something to be said about that. But he does need more production, but more importantly, as you mentioned, he needs to stay healthy. But that's why I think you give it another year. You're only on year 4 of the rookie deal. You should pick up his option for the 5th year. So you have that extra kind of leniency to figure out what you want to do. But this is going to be, I don't want to say make or break year, but this is an important year for Olave, and I'm sure he knows that. Calvin says, don't have breakaway speed at running back. Don't have a bruiser either. Yeah, give me either one. Give me either one, man. You need to figure out how you're going to address that position, whether you get a physical back, whether you get a speed back. Give me something, man. You really desperately need to address that position, because for the Saints right now, I don't love that. I don't love that group. I don't love that group. Jerry said, Chris, did Kellen Moore say that training camp practices are in Metairie or New Orleans? I believe he did. Yeah, he did. They're not moving out of there. I think, let me pull it up. I believe he said they're keeping it in Louisiana this year. I know there's always a question about it and whether or not it's good for the players because it gets super hot, but they'll be keeping it in Louisiana this year for training camp, which I personally prefer. DJ Trauma Game says Olave small and undersized, injured, not all on him though. Carr throws him into a massive neck-breaking contact. Look, I know we've had the discussions about hospital balls and all that, and it is part of it, right? It's part of it, but I do think that there is that concern. Olave, it seems like just his body's not holding up as opposed to other guys. Now that doesn't mean it's all on him, but that is the concern. Doesn't mean I trade him though, and I wouldn't trade him. Jaden says, would be dumb to trade Chris Olave added where they are right now. Look, I agree with that, but who the hell knows? Shit happens. DJ Trauma gave me the super chat. Thank you so much for the support, man. It says, you're going to do a mock draft episode still. Who do we got in 1 and 2 rounds in your mind? I could do a mock draft episode, so let's plan on doing that. I'll release when I'll end up doing it, and we'll do it live. I'll share my screen so we go through it together. And honestly, if you guys want, maybe we could do a vote and you guys can make the picks as well. And then we could do compares. We could do one of mine and then one where you guys get the votes in. And then we could look at the 2 mocks and see which one ends up balancing out the team a little bit better. But as of now, look, first round, I would like to see the Saints add a playmaker, but I also wouldn't mind if they end up adding a quarterback. I know that's not where people want them to go, but if Shador's there at 9 and the Saints like him, I would take him. Now, I also wouldn't mind if the Saints take Will Johnson. I also wouldn't mind if the Saints take Tet McMillan if they really want to add another playmaker. I don't love the idea of taking Tyler Warren at 9 because I think I'd rather just take a tight end in the second round. So maybe that's the one where I would hesitate on. But, that's part of it. I know that the Saints are looking at the edge rush class. I don't know if you should go edge rush in the first round, though. So maybe you sit on that. As for the second round, though, I would probably look at a guy like the Ole Miss corner Trey Amos. I think he might be a pick for them. He's someone they really like from Ole Miss. They've done a lot of extensive work on him. So I think that might be a guy they look at. I think that maybe you go Ole Miss corner in the second round, and then first round, maybe add yourself a playmaker. I think that's where the Saints might go. And look, Saints they've had success with day 2 picks at the secondary position, and it's been a theme of theirs. Alontae Taylor, second round pick. Last year, Kool-Aid McKinstry, second round pick. So maybe they go back with a corner in round 2. But round 1, wouldn't mind them going playmaker, and call me a prisoner of the moment. Wouldn't mind them going quarterback either. But the Saints are going to have time. They're going to have, an opportunity here to address a plethora of positions. So we'll see what they end up doing. But I think that's kind of where I'm at right now. Get me a playmaker or quarterback at number 9, and then go get a defensive position player at that 40 spot, maybe corner. That's kind of where I'm at. And we'll see. The board will change for them, but I'd keep my eye on a cornerback. I think the Saints would like to add a cornerback at some point. But look, if they went playmaker at pick 9 and then Mason Taylor at pick 40, selfishly, because I want them to add more talent to offense, I don't know if I would complain. I really don't. I think that this team needs to add more playmakers. So we'll see. But I do want them to get younger on defense. And, it is that tough thing to grapple when you have a Saints team that doesn't have a lot of talent right now, is trying to figure out how you round out both sides of the ball. Calvin says, still say they should move Alontae back outside and grab D-line or O-line in the second. Would not mind that at all. Look, I think if there's an offensive lineman you like in the second round, you take it. Feel kind of the same way about defensive line as well. I think if you're the Saints and look, I don't think he makes it there, but you look around the class. If James Pierce Jr. starts slipping a little bit, do you trade back up and get him? I know that's someone that the Saints have had their eye on. They like Tennessee players, so that's a player to look at. But I don't know if he'll be in that kind of sphere for them. They love Ohio State players, so I guess you can't knock out Williams. I don't know if he's a great fit for them, though. And I think one thing to look at, there's a Texas connection with the Saints. And I don't know what position that means they'll take, but there is a Texas connection for the Saints. And I would not be surprised if at some point, during this class, they end up going to get themselves one. So whether it's a safety, whether it's D-line, I could see it. But I wouldn't be surprised if they go safety. Forgot his name. It's like Andrew Makuba or whatever it is. Like, I might have butchered the poor man's last name. He's a very talented safety, and maybe he makes sense for the Saints. So would not rule out Texas. That could be at school. The Saints have a lot of college connections now. They went with a younger coaching staff, so would not be surprised if they go that route. And if they do, you know where you can kind of connect the dots. Calvin says, Georgia's got a couple guards they can get in the second. Alfred Collins is nose tackle. I hope they can get him in the third. Look, yeah, again, Alfred Collins is another Texas connection, so I would not rule that out. I would not rule that out in the slightest for the Saints. So it's going to be interesting. They're going to have a lot to do, but I think a lot of it starts with getting playmakers in that first round and then kind of figuring out the rest of your roster then. But we'll see what happens with the Saints. The next couple of weeks are going to be fascinating. I think the teams that you're eyeing, Browns, Giants. Reason I say that is those are two teams in the quarterback market in addition to the Saints. They don't take a quarterback second or third. A, if the Saints want one, they can move up and it won't be that expensive anymore. B, can also push some different talented players around the draft, and maybe that makes them have to go quarterback. So we'll see what happens with New Orleans. We'll see what happens with Chris Olave. But to round everything up on this Tuesday, I don't believe the Saints are going to trade Chris Olave, nor should they trade Chris Olave right now. I do think looking to find that quarterback. And the third thing, keep an eye on those teams picking top three because they all need quarterbacks. If they're not taken, Saints might go up and make a move, and we'll see where it goes from there. But that's going to wrap it up, guys, for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I want to thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. You guys are always so great and kind with your thoughts and comments. I really, really appreciate it. We'll have more content coming up. I'm going to talk about the quarterback situation very soon. I want to do a deep dive into Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, Jackson Dart. That seems to be the three that have been linked to the Saints. What happens there if they take one? What does it mean for the team? Would love to get into that. We'll do our mock draft episode at some point as well. But as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, a great Tuesday, afternoon, night, all that good stuff. And as always, make sure to subscribe to Boot Crew Media and stay tuned for more from the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation. Have a great day, everyone.